We're interested in which fire-type Pokemon has been most successful in the singles competitive scene, as far as OU is concerned, and briefly Ubers as well. But before we select one such Pokemon for standard play, we have to set some parameters for what we're looking for. What are we qualifying as success? As fun as it would be to just pull a Game Freak and give it to Charizard, who has actually had one of the most storied competitive careers of any Pokemon, we think it would be more interesting, at least for the purpose of not being reductive, to examine how far the fire type has come and what it does. We want something that is well representative of the fire type. The fire type has long ranked among the most offensively dangerous Pokemon in the game, with Fire Stab melting key defensive types in Steel and Grass, with strong base power moves coming off of a powerful base attacking stats that similarly threaten many neutral targets. It was limited at first, mostly just Moltres in belated OU Destroyer roles in Gen 1 and Gen 2, with the latter generation also seeing occasional appearances by Belly Drum Charizard. But fires as a whole began to gain recognition for their anti-metagame talents in Gen 3, featuring both Moltres and Charizard once again, as Pokemon eventually discovered to be so threatening, they rose from BL to OU after the fact. Then in Gen 4, they took off entirely. With the additions of Infernape and Heatran, fires went from anti-metagame to simply being the metagame, blasting through the tier with variety and power alike. Though it's thought of in offensive terms first and foremost, the past decade or so has also seen an increasing number of fire types used defensively in standard play, not just the exception that Heatran was previously. The most famous example is of course Wolfglick's best buddy, the VGC ruling Incineroar, but the phenomenon goes back even further in the singles format. Usually, Fire's defensive utility was thought of in terms of how it let them hit the field to unleash their attacks, like Moltres and Charizard could switch into Metagross Meteor Mash in Gen 3. Even the Fires that had defensive niches were still used with offensive builds. Consider GSC OU, where Houndoom was used as a switch-in to Pursuit Trap Ghosts and Psychics like Gengar and Exeggutor, but was still mostly attacking with its dual stabs, while Moltres' Rest Talk set that let it check Exeggutor and Nidoking was in service of its Charcoal and Sunny Day fueled Fire Blast that threatened a 2-hit KO on even the King Snorlax. In advance, Camerupt had a talent for switching into Gengar and Zapdos, but it also spammed Explosion. The earliest use of fires for pure utility can be traced to non-OU tiers. See Gen 2 and Gen 3 Ubers, especially the latter, where Ho-Oh walled the daylights out of many Mewtwo variants as well as the Lati twins, and was great help against Deoxys attack as well. Then in Gen 4, tanky Arcanine ruled over UU. However, as far as OU was concerned, pure defensive fire was less a fire thing and more of a Heatran thing. Mostly, fires were outrageously dangerous offensive behemoths like Blaziken, who became the first non-legendary fire type to get banned from OU in Generation 5. Then Gen 6 came around, and with the assistance of a buff Defog helping against the Stealth Rock that would otherwise plague them, non-Heatran fires were able to utilize their bulk alongside other unique talents, such as both absorbing and dishing out Will-O-Wisp, as well as being some of the best options in tanking their fellow fire types. Talonflame was one thing. Its ability to take on Mega Charizard Y was especially appreciated, as well as other threats like Superior, but when Mega Charizard X was used as a bulky Will-O-Wisping roosting tank, whether physically or specially defensive, it really ushered in a new era. In addition to them, you'd also start seeing major threats like Volcanion used with pure defensive sets, or Victini with great emphasis on utility. This is not to say that overpoweringly strong fires disappeared, far from it. New additions Blacephalon continued to rank among the most dangerous, feared threats around. However, it was now established that OU fire types beyond Heatran could be more than just their power. So with this in mind, we want to select a Pokemon that fulfills the highest bar of excellence and doesn't lean only towards offense or defense. For instance, Blacephalon is absurdly difficult to withstand offensively, but defensively, it's terrible. Something like Volcanion is excellent on both offense and defense, but its speed stat often holds it back from true domination. And before we jump into our possible candidates, we'll examine what the result would have been had there been no holds barred and we'd ventured into the realm of Ubers. Shockingly, Arceus Fire is not in the running. Instead, it comes down to either the long dominant Ho-Oh, a staple of the tier since Generation 2, making it difficult to imagine anything else. But even though Primal Groudon didn't even get introduced immediately in XY, having to wait until Oraz, it still completely and utterly defined both Generation 6 and 7. It is not at all an exaggeration to refer to it as the Gen 2 Snorlax of those metagames. It was outright mandatory and did it all. Stealth rocking, setup sweeping, mix attacking, no matter your team, you wanted Primal Groudon on it. However, despite those towering highs, we're going to give the best fire type in Ubers to Ho-Oh, because being as excellent as it has been for legitimately all but the first generation of Ubers just cannot be beaten. And because of how superb it is on both offense and defense, the former especially after having received the Kyogre destroying Brave Bird and Heart Gold and Soul Silver that completely revolutionized how it played. Even though it may swing more in one or the other direction depending on the generation, it is still a potent hit taker even at its most aggressive. The hit taking helps to dish out the hits, and even when walling opponents, it is not to be trifled with thanks to the innate strength of its signature burn happy Sacred Fire, Choice Band, Defog Wall, Sub Roost, All Out Attacker, even Choice Scarf. Ho-Oh is far more diverse than you'd think at first, and is similarly extraordinary at fitting onto just about every team. It even wound up featuring on many successful Kyogre teams in Gen 4 Ubers. And we don't mean the dual weather Groudon and Kyogre teams. No, we're talking strictly rain only. How could we give the title of best Uber Fire to anything else? And now we have to glance at the candidates for the main premise of this video, the best fire across the generations of OU play. There are two very obvious candidates here. First, if we're simply going by the number of times a Pokemon has been banned from OU, of course it's Blaziken, which racked up the honor 3 times in generations 5, 6, and 7. It was also an OU terror in generation 8 and maintains a niche in the tier in Gen 9 after utterly destroying UU. It is the definition of a glass cannon, except unlike other glass cannons, it gets faster and faster with each turn, so it becomes increasingly difficult to prey on the glass part, especially when the cannon part is hitting so hard, with famously amazing coverage between its dual stabs that also rock excellent base power. Swords Dance just makes it downright ridiculous. Plus, even before receiving speed boost, Blaziken had an OU niche in Gen 3 and excelled in Gen 4 UU. It was also a strong choice in Gen 5 Ubers under Groudon's permanent sun, and its Mega Form had a place in Gen 6 and 7 as well. Now, if we're going with the most recognizable fire type face of OU across the generations, it has to be Heatran, which wasn't just the defining fire, but one of the most defining OU Pokemon, period. It was also an utterly incredible Pokemon on Groudon Sun teams in the Dragon and Steel dominated Gen 4 Ubers, while even appearing on a Kyogre Rain team once in Black and White 2, and having a solid role in X and Y Ubers pre-Primal Groudon. From Gens 4 through 8 though, Heatran was never less than essential in OU, and still has a niche in the OU of Gen 9, while thriving in UU. It was unique in not just being a fire type with bulk, but also a steel type with its invaluable set of resists, notably to Dragon. This helped it find opportunities to launch its impressive offense, ranging from the absurdity of Choice Specs Overheat, to the cleanup reliability of Choice Scarf, to the trapping utility of Magma Storm, or let it stand firm as one of the metagame's most reliable defensive pieces. It was famous for gaining more health back with Protect than a lot of Pokemon did with Recover, and its utility alongside its incredible defensive typing seemed endless. Stealth Rock, Status, including Stab, Lava Plume, Taunt, Roar, Substitute. However, we have decided to go in a different direction. We have selected Volcarona because we believe it strikes the perfect balance between our two other candidates, and it has only gotten better with time. It shares the overwhelming explosive sweeping power of Blaziken, such that it constantly provokes questions of whether it is excessively strong for OU. And indeed, it finally got banned in Generation 9, along with the most robust defensive stylings of Heatran. And most importantly, it has maintained its consistency in its excellence over the years, with that peak in Gen 9, whereas Blaziken and Heatran, strong though they still are, have been unable to keep up the glory of their highest highs. Now, Volcarona is not quite as extreme a sweeper as Blaziken, and it is especially not as effective defensively as Heatran. However, Blaziken is incredibly frail and can rarely afford to take a hit. Volcarona is not always the sturdiest Pokemon around, but both its solid natural bulk and the fact that it strengthens its special defense with its boosting move makes it more difficult to revenge kill. Additionally, said natural bulk can actually be stretched quite far, with tankier roosting sets that both assist in sweeping and taking on the opponent. Heatran, defensive stalwart and offensive threat though it may be, doesn't quite burst through opposing teams with such instant ferocity. Volcarona occupies this perfect middle ground, which has long since given its success acclaim, and in many cases of frustrated players destroyed by it, hatred. Indeed, just because Volcarona finally got banned in Generation 9 doesn't mean it was its first rodeo. It's been a highly controversial piece in every gen since it was first introduced, with something about the gen always playing to its strength. Gen 8 introduced heavy-duty boots to nullify modified Stealth Rock weakness, Gen 7 had Z moves, Gen 6 had Defog, and Gen 5 had both permanent weather and its own form of a Z move in the gems, until the gems were banned. In fact, a large part of why they were banned was thanks to Volcarona. Of course, Volcarona barely needed anything, as it was just so inherently threatening from the jump, and the rest served to accentuate that. There were clamoring for Volcarona suspects many a time throughout the generations, especially in Gens 5 and 6, and it's actually been on the chopping block several times in 5, only to narrowly avoid it. One can only claim its Stealth Rock weakness for so long before accepting that if it were as simple as getting rocks up, not only would Volcarona not be sweeping everyone with ease, which it often did even when coming into rocks and boosting from 50%, but Ho-Oh wouldn't even be uber. And yes, that is a debate people have brought up before, though thankfully not to any successful end. So let's examine just why Volcarona is so successful at what it does. Quiver Dance is the most famous thing about it, but packing a special attack stat above Heatran's alongside the renowned benchmark of base 100 speed and a strongly complementary second stab that lets it slice through psychic and dark types, as well as providing a strong neutral hit against fire resist like Water Dragon and Rock, means Volcarona would have been a powerful offensive Pokemon even if it had to stick with Calm Mind for its boosting, as it would have had it been introduced in either of the previous 2 generations. However, with this huge innate threat level in mind, the speed boosting Calm Mind that is Quiver Dance, of course, launched it to stratospheric heights on day 1 of Black and White in a way no other Quiver Dance has come close to approaching. It's got the power to become a one-hit KO machine after a single boost, to say nothing of the fact that one of its options for Fire Stab, Fiery Dance, packs a 50% chance to tack on another special attack boost on. Meanwhile, the base 100 speed makes it a perfect candidate for speed boosting, playing like a special counterpart to Dragon Dance Salamence, whose attack is equivalent to Volk's special attack. At this level of speed, you're going to be outrunning a lot of common Scarfers after a single boost, most notably Landorus Therian. You're going to have to dip into quite a limited pool of Pokemon to find a Scarfer that is faster than Volk after a boost and actually beats it. Not every Pokemon faster than Volcarona makes a good Scarfer, and being a Scarfer faster than Volcarona doesn't necessarily mean you're going to beat it, as in the cross-generational cases of Scarf Latios and Kartana. Speaking of beating Volcarona after a boost, we didn't even mention its great natural special defense. At base 105, alongside its solid base 85 HP, its special bulk is comparable to Heatran's, and this being boosted further by Quiver Dance pretty much rules out reliable revenge killing with a special move. You weren't going to get much better than Scarf Keldeo Hydro Pump, and even that level of power couldn't safely get the job done. In fact, trying to take on Volcarona with special attacks was a good way of handing it to a second Quiver Dance so as to really make sure it destroy it. While Volcarona was certainly left wanting for coverage in its moveset at times, its move pool did not leave it lacking. It was more of a matter of fitting all its great options in. Hidden Power Ground was most famously its tool to dispatch the Heatran that would otherwise blanket stabs entirely, but it also rocked Hidden Power Ice to superb effect to dispatch Dragonite, Garchomp, and especially defensive Gliscor that were often used to check it. Psychic was most renowned for its shattering of Toxapex, but even beforehand was excellent in Gen 5, especially with Psychic Gem, to turn the tables on many checks, most famously its otherwise most reliable answer Terrakion in Sand, as well as Keldeo, Tentacruel, and potentially Dragonite, and even Gyarados with Stealth Rock up. Once Black and White 2 added Giga Drain and Roost to its repertoire, things really got wild. Some Sun teams had used Chestal Rest sets before, but now Volcarona reliably took healing into its own wings, while Giga Drain made it even more adept than it already was at ripping through waters like Gastrodon and Jellicent. Volcarona was so dangerous with Fire Stab alone, sometimes it even dropped Bug Buzz for extra coverage, such as the so-called Rock Polish Genesect Volcarona set that imitated that other broken bug's Fire, Ice, and Grass coverage. Even 2 more Volcarona sets didn't need it, as demonstrated by Gen 7's bulky Roost variants that liked running HP Ground and Bug Buzz's Steed. On the other hand, sometimes Volcarona only needed its stabs as evidenced not just by these same Roost sets, but by more aggressive variants packing Substitute. Those even pushed Bug Buzz's power further by opting for Swarm as its ability over the usual Flame Body, working perfectly in tandem with Sub. These variants didn't need to overpower Heatran with HP Ground if they could simply dodge Toxic with Sub and boost repeatedly in its face. Most Heatran variants struggled greatly against this, with so many incredible options and superb power, meaning you couldn't exactly take your time dancing around it to figure out what it was rocking, to say nothing of how the right array of Volcarona moves would often just completely dismantle you no matter what. It's no wonder it earned the name the Matchup Moth. This isn't even taking into account its item choice in the pre-heavy duty boots days. The unpredictability of Volcarona's item in Gens 5 through 7 often wound up even more impactful than its moves, since the item would enable it to march forward with deadly simplicity. Besides Gen 5's various gems and Gen 7's Z moves, which already had a ton of dangerous variety to them, it also leaned into brute force territory to shocking effect in in Gens 5 and 6 with Life Orb. In Gen 5, it laughed at your water moves with Passion Berry, it shrugged off would-be hindrances and Thunder Waves and Toxic with Lumberry, it could enhance its longevity through the fast-paced Citrus Berry in Gen 5, which helped counteract Stealth Rock or Iapapa Berry in Gen 7, or in general, good old-fashioned leftovers. All of these tended to mess with how you'd answer Volcarona because you often wouldn't hard counter it, but instead play around it, and these items serve to shut such attempts down. Lum Volcarona doesn't care if your Ferrothorn has Thunder Wave to try and punish a Quiver Dance. On one hand, the rather extreme nature of how most people like to play Volcarona, coupled with its devastating impact, made the Match of Moth accusations difficult to refute at times. It did, of course, have its famous weakness to Stealth Rock, meaning that it was in many cases best to play in a go for broke style. Its unimpressive defense stat that made it vulnerable to most priority moves also contributed to the sense that it could be hit or miss. On the other hand, Volcarona more than anything else punished lazy team building by those who got complacent against such a threat. The way it waltzed into meta staples like Clefable and Ferrothorn and threatened to end games on the spot if they didn't afford it the respect it commanded, it didn't just do this through brainless power and speed either. In Gen 8, it made up for the loss in hidden power by incorporating Safeguard of all things into its moveset, which among other things, let it boost up in front of and eventually destroy that Flame Body Heatran that had become popular, not fearing Toxic. This illustrates just one instance of how it was far more than just a mindless battering ram. Volcarona had a thoroughly unique defensive profile that was wielded effectively by many top players. In Gen 7, some bulky teams loaded it with physical defense and let it answer Mega Mawile, one of the most unanswerable Pokemon in the game, making full use of Flame Body to completely ruin it should it attack. A tactic that was equally useful against the similarly threatening and controversial Kartana. No Volcarona could be used to full potential without good play, but these variants placed especially high demands on their user, and in doing so offered unique, impactful rewards. Volcarona was also one of the best natural answers to another one of the most frightening Gen 7 Pokemon, Magearna. Funnily enough, in early Gen 7, some players used Quiver Dance, less bulky Volcarona, as a counter to two of the other insane bugs prior to their bans. The aforementioned Genesect was one, and the monstrous new Pheromosa was the other. Since Volcarona was being used defensively, rather than bother with a Quiver Dance they wouldn't be clicking much, these variants used U-turn on it to easily switch into the newly buffed Dugtrio. Speaking of Dugtrio, the way it enabled Volcarona contributed greatly to Sun being nerfed not once, but twice in Generation 5. First, the player base sought to reduce the impact of Volcarona in its best weather by removing the chlorophyll sweepers, namely Venusaur, that it paired with so well. But Volcarona came roaring back with its new pal Cresselia, revitalizing a new form of Dugtrio-fueled Sun, prompting the player base to axe Arena Trap entirely. Of course, while Volcarona was most famous for operating in Sun, it actually tended to be overkill. Volcarona also famously propelled weatherless offense teams to success by being so brutally effective at slicing through the entire metagame that it more than made up for not fitting a weather inducer into your set of 6. It continued this tremendous hyper offense enabling in Gen 6 and 7, pairing with monsters like Manaphy and Superior to overwhelm opponents through unreal levels of special attacking onslaught. Volcarona could also function on sand teams quite well, enjoying their defensive stability and reliable rapid spinning in Excadrill. This style was also cross-generational. However, the craziest thing of all was that Volcarona could even be used to tremendous effects on rain teams because it got access to excellent powerful coverage in Hurricane. It could also use boosted hidden power waters to beat Heatran. It could drop fire coverage, but it tended not to, because Volcarona was so scary that it even used fire in rain summoned by its own team. Volcarona also had the uncanny ability to sweep most rain teams, funnily enough. There are many examples one might use to illustrate the fundamental absurdity of Volcarona, but we're choosing to go with the fact that it was the first fire type used on high-level OU rain teams, and it certainly isn't as tailor-made for the task as the half-water, water-immune Volcanion either. Of course, we would also point that after a decade plus of the player base of many metagames calling for Volcarona's ban, it finally crossed threshold into the Uber tier upon receiving Terastallization and Terra Blast in Gen 9. To put it in comparison, in the most power-crept generation of all, Volcarona got itself banned for being too broken for a metagame populated almost solely by broken things. Meanwhile, Blaziken briefly found itself in UU, where Heatran resides to this day. With Terra, Volcarona exemplified the best of both their worlds. Its extremely Blaziken-esque sweeping took on a grotesquely dangerous form with the mega hidden power power that was Terra Blast, accentuated further by its Heatran style bulk, which on similar display with its ability to shift type, performing that all-important function of dramatically turning the tables on its already limited pool of answers. With the addition of heavy-duty boots, Volcarona took a giant step away from the riskiness that it had to fight against previously, and with Terra, it assumed its most complete form, launching it past the completion and earning its place for us as the most complete, best fire type in the history of OU singles. And that's it. We understand the immense subjectivity behind this video, so we of course welcome any and all debate on the matter. If someone were to insist that it is Heatran, for instance, it's difficult to truly argue against it, to be honest. Nor can Blaziken's 3 Uber placements be refuted. We simply believe that Volcarona, for getting scarier as the generations go on and power creep increases, had a serious argument for the spot and wanted to present the case for it. Of course, one could also make a more in-depth video on the rich history of competitive fires in general, and that's just OU, let alone the other tiers. But for now though, we believe in Volcarona's claim to the highest spot among the many excellent fires. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Dr. Mint, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Lord of the Rabbit, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu, and Quetzalcoatl Northropi for their major support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.